Hello, welcome to part 13 of this Learning JavaScript playlist. Today we are gonna start on the theme of promises or a promise object, and we're gonna build a simple version from scratch so I or we can understand how the real promises work. And why? Why are we looking at promises from scratch? Well, because when we fetch something from an API, which is very common on a website, when we fetch some info like users or our menu items or whatever we fetch from our server, and we're gonna look at the server side on a future playlist. But when we fetch from a server, what this fetch return here is an object called a promise object. Why? Because this fetching from a server is not instant. Sometimes it takes microseconds, 1 second, and sometimes it tries and then it comes back with an error because the server might be down just that precise moment. And so our whole website does not crash, timers keep working, and the little buttons to close and open stuff keeps working. We need to put these fetch things that take time needs to be put aside while the rest of the JavaScript keeps working. So this becomes very used and very important every time. So that's why I'm like diving a bit too much into this, but for me, I think it's a very important and interesting part of the whole web application process. So enough of that, let's get to it. So this fetch returns a promise object, a real one. In this video, we're gonna create a simple version of my own, and we're gonna call it my simple promise. So const p, it's gonna be like this: new my simple promise, because we are creating this one. So what does my simple promise object, and like this, capital letter, my simple promise is a class or an object, but we're gonna create it. But so what does it take? It's gonna take, you guessed it, a callback function. And it's gonna look like this: resolve done. Like we saw last video, these two parameters we need to put in our callback function. These two arguments, this function expects two arguments: resolve and reject. And this is the tricky part. Resolve and reject are not keywords. They are not special. We named it like this. It could be named A and this could be called B, right? But then here we are going to need to call A. These are functions that are being passed to us, and we're going to see how this works later on. Let's keep moving. So let me control Z. because this is the pattern, the pattern when we do as a real promise, the ones that do exist, these ones. This one does work. Resolve console dot log. Here it console.logs the done. When we resolve, all right, but this promise is the real one. We're gonna build our funky manual one, a simple version, so I understand how it works, or we. So let's start to build one step by step. And that's why I stepped out into classes last video, because we need to build it. Constructor, even though classes, in the end, every instance of a class is an object, and we run this executor. That's why we put parentheses. So what's going on? We are defining a class object instance, and every instance, when we create a new instance, is going to run this constructor function, right? And it takes one parameter. So the parameter it expects, here it says any, but it's not. It needs to be a function, because then we run it here. Like, we can name it my callback function, right? And if const p is equal to a new my simple promise, and then we need to pass, the constructor expects one callback function, so let's provide one. Console.log hello. Let's run this. There, hello. So what's going on? When we create a new my simple promise, it takes in a callback. Let's go in further. Function my callback function takes no parameters, and then our block of code, and then console.log hello, and then here we pass my callback function. We just pass it in. It gets run here while the constructor is running. Save. There, hello. Hello from here. There, hello from here. Is this whole thing, does this whole thing make sense? And here, executor can be named executor, and it's all hello from the new version. Control S here, hello. So this still works, right? Because my callback function is declared here outside the class, and then we are creating a new instance of my simple promise, naming it P. And we are passing the callback function as an argument to the creating of this class instance. And when we are creating it, we run this constructor function, and we pass the callback function as a parameter. All right, let's keep going. So for the real my simple promise, let's add some things to the constructor. And what are we adding to the constructor? We adding this dot state equals pending, and this dot value undefined, and then we run the executor. But first we assign this state property and this value property to the, so when we run this and we console.log, how are we naming our p dot state comma p dot value, run this pending and undefined. So our promise object is exactly one of three states, has exactly one of three. It starts always as pending, and then it changes either to fulfilled or rejected. So let's keep going. So we need to write two functions that we call either when the thing worked or when it didn't. So let's do that. Let me just add some space. Now const resolve value, and then the block of code. So this is a function we are declaring inside the constructor function, and when it gets run, it changes the state. And this dot value assigns the value when we run the resolve function with the parameter we pass into it. And now we need the and I am naming this like this, right? These are not keywords. We are naming these functions like this because we want to. Because we are writing this my simple promise, right? And then what is the reject gonna do? It's gonna change this state to rejected. This dot value reason. So this is the core simple version of a promise. So let's run it. Simple version. Const p equal new my simple promise, and then we pass in the callback. So we do like this, right? And then we resolve reject. No, it's reject. And then we are gonna use this function that gets passed to us. House blend ready. Now console.log p.state console.log p.value. So let's Control S. Oop. So here's the mistake. At 21.3, resolve at new my simple promise at line 16 here. So why? Because we are running the executor without passing in the resolve and the reject. Now let's run it. Control S. There we go. Fulfilled and house blend ready. That's our state and our value. So right now it is instant. The drink. So let's change that. So let's make it with the tool we learned from the event loop episode, the timeout, the timer. So let me just delete this whole line and then set timeout. And then set timeout takes two things, a callback function and here, callback function and the time, 1 second. And on our callback function, we are gonna run the resolve function. So this set timeout is gonna send this function to the browser and put it on hold while the browser runs 1 second. After the browser finishes the second, it's gonna come and put back on our queue this anonymous function, which is gonna run, is gonna run the resolve function with the latte ready string as a parameter. So let's run this. Here's the problem, right? Pending and undefined. Because when we get to this console.logs, this second has not passed yet. So if right now I then console.log here, the p.state, now it's fulfilled. Console.log p.value latte ready. But so who is checking this? So we who tells us that the resolve was run? So how do we do this? So it like flipped in secret. No one knew, because by the time it ran this resolve function, which is the one that flips the state to fulfilled and assigns the value to the value, we had already passed through this console.log, right? So how do we find out when it flips? We can't just keep logging p.state and hoping. We need to register interest to say, here's what I want done once it gets fulfilled. And that's when the dot this, it's going to be a method we add to our my little promise. But then again, if we use this, and on the method this, we say, hey, is it resolved yet? Run it. But if we just run it right after and it's not done yet, then what's it going to run? So we are on the same conundrum, right? So how is this resolved? So it does one of two things. It asks, this then function asks, is the state fulfilled? Are we already fulfilled? And if it is fulfilled, we call the function now. If it's still pending, then add it to a list of callbacks, and then we run it later. So let's start by adding that state, well, not state, the list to the object. So this dot callbacks is equal to an empty array for now. Now let's start working on the then function. This is gonna be outside the constructor because we are gonna call it something like p dot then, and then do something, right? And then the then function goes outside the constructor, like I said. So outside, then we can declare it like this. It's a function on fulfilled, comma, on there. So I'm just gonna write it out. So it's gonna be if this dot state is equal to fulfilled, then we run this, sorry, this, oh my, this block of code, and fulfilled else if this dot state equals rejected, then on rejected with this dot value. And finally, else. If it's not fulfilled or not rejected, that means it's pending. So we this dot callbacks dot push, and we are gonna add an object. Unfulfilled, unrejected. Like this. So if the state is fulfilled, call the unfulfilled function with this value as a parameter. If it is rejected, call the onRejected function with this dot value as a parameter. And if it's still pending, add an object to the list of callbacks. So the list of callbacks is really a list of objects, and the objects are callbacks. All right, let's keep moving on. So now resolve has one more job. When it flips the state, it also has to go through that list and actually call everyone on that list. So now the resolve, we need to do this dot callbacks dot for each, and we saw this for each on some videos ago. And then this for each runs a function. So JavaScript loves callback functions. Have you noticed that? We can do this, but it's a one-liner, so we're gonna skip, and we are gonna name the callback as the callback, and then, which is really an object with a callback. So the syntax is cv dot on fulfilled this dot value. So I know this is a handful of code and syntax, but it's worth going through it, I think. I have a typo here. Fulfilled and rejected. So this is it. This is the basic, super basic version. This syntax is unfulfilled, and then unfulfilled. It's the same thing as doing this, just right? It's like a short version of declaring when the name of the object is the same as the value. We can do the simple version like this. All right, so let's run it. I know we only did this callback for each on the resolve and not on the reject. So let's run it. Let's run the then only on a resolve. So let's const. Let's start from scratch. Const order is equal to a new my simple promise. Create a new object, and then the object takes the resolve, comma, reject callback function. And here we are gonna set the timeout. And in the set the timeout, we are gonna do the callback and the 1 second. And on our callback, when set timeout finishes the 1 second, it's gonna run this callback, and this callback is gonna run the resolve function with a americano, comma, ready. And then we are gonna console.log the state now, and then comma order dot state, and then we are gonna order dot then, and this takes a callback function. Console.log got it. comma MSG, and MSG is gonna be our message. So let's run this, see if I didn't make any mistake. Cross our fingers, Control S, and then got it. So here we go. We have our simplest of simple versions of a promise. So the resolve has the for each unfulfilled this dot value. So then on our reject we need this dot callbacks for each, and then cb dot on rejected. So then, okay, nothing broke. So now we can resolve Americano ready. First, let's message, comma, and then if we are passing the two functions, the resolve and the rejected, console.log and then failed, comma, error. And I am missing a let's put this parenthesis here. Like this. So now we can resolve Americano ready, or we can reject out of coffee, pending failed out of coffee. So we can, if true, then resolve what are we resolving? We are resolving, what did I have? Americano latte ready. Else all right, so if something happens and comes back as true, latte ready, and then something happens and comes back as false, failed out of coffee. So handful of syntax, handful, and I know this still promise, simple promise, is not the real promise object. It's sort of like a very simple one. The real one has more things, this and that, but this is the very core simple, super simple version of a promise. So on the next video, when we start doing some example with the real promise, this is, I hope, less confusing, or not as confusing, or maybe a little bit more confusing. But so that will be it for this video. On the next one, we're gonna look at real promise objects and fetch and async and await. So thanks a lot for watching. See you on the next one.